Hi everyone, welcome to our GCSE English live group tutorial. Hope you've all had a lovely evening and are ready for a session this morning. I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes for some more people to join before we get started. But in the meantime, just to say that this is our first English session, so we're really excited to see so many of you joining us this morning. And this session is a session on fictional use of language, devices and features. As always, these sessions are recorded, and hopefully by now you should know where to find links to all of the sessions, but don't worry, if you've signed up to the online school, you'll get an email notifying you of where you can find today's recording. And also to say that typically how we run these sessions, if you're new, is that we do 45 minutes of the teaching, and then the 15 minutes are left at the end for any questions to be asked. So if we get started, today's session is run by one of our tutors, Vicky. Vicky is one of our amazing tutors who is also a trained English teacher. So she's got lots of experience teaching, and she's also done over 250 lessons with my tutor. So I'm going to hand over to Vicky, who is going to lead the session today.
Hi, morning everyone. Right, so what we are going to look at today is we are going to look at language devices and features. So this is the AQA paper 1 question 2. So let's have a quick look at what the question requires you to do. So you will always be given a very similar question. So how does the writer use language to describe? And then you will be given a subject. So for this question, I'm asking the environment. So you will always be given the same 3 bullet points down here, and this will all be the same. So the only thing that ever changes with this is the little bit that's underlined here, the subject. Everything else stays the same, so it's nice, easy, straightforward. So we can look at 3 different bullet points. So we can look at words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. Now I'm mainly going to focus on language features and techniques for this session. However, we might look a little bit at sentence forms towards the end, and I'm going to bundle words and phrases in together with language features and techniques. The other thing to note when it comes to paper 1 question 2 is that AQA are very nice to us, and they give us a pulled out extract of the section we're going to be looking at in the text. So we're not looking at the entire text. We're usually looking at a paragraph that's between 10 to 16 lines long. And they print that just above this question for you, so you don't have to flick back to look at your insert. Now, this is slightly different to your paper 2. When it comes to a similar question, you have to go and find it. So this is the nicer version, I suppose, of this question when it comes to finding the stimulus that you've got to focus on. Right, okay. So in general terms, language features and techniques are given to create a clearer image in the reader's head. It helps us imagine what is being written about, what things look like. Obviously, that's a huge generalisation. And when it comes to actually writing your answer, don't write that because it's not specific enough. We need to be specific. So we need to think about how and why they are effective. The main thing we need to look at is the effectiveness. We know it's there for a reason. We know it's there to describe something because that's what they do. So we don't need to say that to the examiner because it won't get us any marks because it's too general. Right, so let's have a look at the different language devices that we could think of. So I use this acrostic, Proud Smile, to help my students remember the variety of language devices you could think of when it comes to fiction. Non-fiction, there's a different one which I'm sure most of you are aware of, which is DeForest. So that's for the non-fiction paper 2. For the paper 1 then, this isn't exclusive, this isn't a finite list, there are other things that could go into this. However, finding an acrostic to fit all of them is a huge task and almost impossible. So here's what I've got so far. So personification, pathetic fallacy, repetition, rhetorical question, oxymoron, use of senses, bit of a tricky one there, sensory description, same thing, it's just fitting it in. Detailed description, sounds, so we could have alliteration, onomatopoeia and sibilance under that bracket, similes, symbolism, metaphors, imagery, length of sentences and edit. Now the edit at the bottom is more for your question 5. So what I suggest for my students when they go into the exam is they write all of these down. This is effectively a good success criteria for you when it comes to your writing. You can tick off the ones that you've done as you go along when you write. So you know how many you've done, how many more you need to include, which ones you could include, which ones you've already used so you don't overuse a particular feature. So the edit is more to remind you to proofread when it comes to your question 5s. So we're going to ignore the E there for today because we don't need it for the reading section of the paper that we're looking at. So lengths of sentences also is more so with the question 5s. However, we are looking at sentence forms here. So to a certain extent, we use that one as well, but it's slightly different. Right, okay, so what I would like you to do for me, please, is go into the chat section, and are there any other devices you can think of that are not on this list? There are a few. See what you can come up with. I'll just give you 30 seconds or so to do that. So to the person who said, I'm doing edXL, will this still help me? Yes, it will. The reason being that you will still look at language devices and techniques, but it might just be slightly different in the way that it's formatted. So don't worry too much about that. Plosive letters, yeah, so that sort of comes under the sounds. So for anyone who doesn't know what a plosive is a b or a p sound usually. We have other plosive sounds like k and g. So it's where we stop the airflow in our mouths, and then it creates sort of an explosion, really. So for example, p and b, it's called a bilabial plosive. So p and b is where I stop the airflow with my lips, where my lips come together, and then we have an explosion of sound. K and g, so say this is the roof of my mouth and this is my tongue. The k and g goes up to my soft palate and stops the airflow. So with plosives, that would come under alliteration if we've got repeating plosive sounds, usually p and b, and we usually see those a lot in war poetry because it's used to describe the explosions around us. They're quite harsh sounds. Right. Hyperbole, yeah, lovely. So a hyperbole is exaggerating something. Assonance, so that's repetition of a particular vowel sound. Symbolism, yeah, guys, I'm going to go through what each of these mean. So I will come back to those saying, what is this one? Structure, so structure is your question 3. Structural features, things like setting, omniscient narrator, perspective, any of those, that comes under question 3, and we will cover that in the future. Juxtaposition, yeah, so I'll talk about the difference between juxtaposition and oxymoron when we get to oxymoron. There's absolutely loads of here. Triplets, yep, fantastic. Adjectives, emotive language, yeah, emotive language you more see in your paper 2s, so that's creating a particular emotion. Yeah, there's absolutely loads of stuff here, guys. Well done. Right, okay, so let's move on to talking through what each one of these is. So I've popped hyperbole and juxtaposition up there. The other one, the M's fallen off the bottom there, anthropomorphism, which is where we give a non-living object a body part that a human or a living thing might have. For example, saying the sun smiled. To be able to smile, you must have lips. So that would be an example of anthropomorphism. Right, okay, so personification then. Personification is where we give a non-living thing qualities that only humans can have. This leads on really nicely actually from anthropomorphism. So these two are easily confused. The difference being personification is where we give an attribute, for example, saying that something runs which can't actually run. So water running, for example, will be personification. I've got a few examples down here. So the sea heaved a heavy sigh. The sea can't actually heave, we can. The stars dance playfully. Anthropomorphism is slightly different. So that's where we give sort of a body part rather than a quality, something we can do with our bodies. So as I said, saying that the sun smiled, that would be giving it lips, or saying that, you know, table has legs, that's anthropomorphism. It doesn't actually have a leg, not in the same way that we do. So that's the sort of difference between those two things there. Throughout this, I have taken some examples from the AQA Power and Conflict poems. So there's just a few varieties of things for you to look at, which is a crossover into your literature. Okay, so quickly, 30 seconds or a minute or so, see if you can come up for me in the chat section a human action that these things, these objects could do for me. Coming back to rhymes, rhymes is something that we would see in poetry. You're right, it is a language feature, but it's not something that we will come across for this paper, so we don't worry about rhyme. The clouds wept, lovely. The beach ball leaped, the sand spread. Clouds can cry, yeah, I think they probably can. That's a really nice one, actually. The beach ball danced underneath the sun wrestled with the starfish. Lovely, these are fantastic, guys. Yep, absolutely, you've really got a hang of that. Lovely. Right, okay, let's move on. So, pathetic fallacy, this is a really nice one. This is something that we quite commonly see. So when the weather represents a feeling, I apologise if that's fallen underneath there. So the sun set on a brilliant day. Mary ran frantically to the bus stop, missing the bus by a millisecond. She turned on her heel slowly, rain ricocheting off her cheek, and headed home. And then I've got a nice little one there from Wilfred Owen's Exposure. Our brains ache in the merciless iced east winds, and that's fighting in the trenches in World War I. Pathetic fallacy, quite a nice easy one to do there. Repetition, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you what that is, so just repeating the same word or idea more than once. It can be an idea as well. This one I've just picked out repetitions of the same word because that's more to do with the language devices and features, question 2. Question 3, the repetition of ideas is more to do with structure, but we will get to that when we look at the structure. Right, okay, so rhetorical questions, again, quite a nice straightforward one. So a question that doesn't need an answer. So, just having a look at the chat. Haven't got any questions so far on that. Okay, so a question that doesn't need an answer. So there's some nice simple ones there. Something that we don't see so much of in the writing for the reading section. So don't worry too much about spotting that one. Right, okay, oxymorons. So this is where we put two words together which have opposite meanings. So, for example, warm ice, alone together, dark light, black and white. Juxtaposition is slightly different. So a juxtaposition is where we have two contrasting ideas. So it's not words, it's ideas. So juxtaposition is a bigger sort of piece of material that you're looking at. Oxymoron is small words that are close, either next to each other or close together. Juxtaposition is much bigger. Right, okay, so about a minute or so then, can you think of an opposite that we could use for these words? So the one at the bottom there, hidden, is sad. So can you come up with some opposites that we could make to use an oxymoron for me, please? Sad love, dead alive, yeah, the living dead, yeah, really nice one. Poor and rich, yes, so with poor and rich, I had a really nice one that one of my students came up with, was the idea of poor people being happy because we associate being poor that you're really miserable. So that was quite a nice one. I enjoyed being sad. That's a lovely one. Poor millionaire, poor wealthy. Yeah, fantastic. Right, let's move on. I appreciate I'm whizzing through all of these things because I want you to have a look at how we actually use these in a question too. Right, use of senses then. This is a really nice one. Again, send me some of your ideas for this one. So imagine you're on a beach. So how could you just describe the scene using your senses? So I've got touch, taste, see, hear and smell. Now, see, you will automatically do without realising that you're doing it because you can't do a descriptive piece without using your eyes effectively. Hear, you will probably almost always do, again, without realising it. Touch, taste and smell are the trickier ones. What I advise when it comes to writing, don't feel like you have to shoehorn all of these in for you to get marks for use of senses. You don't. If it doesn't fit in, don't shoehorn it in because it will ruin the flow of your piece. So for example, with taste is the sort of the one which is really difficult to do. The only time that I sort of really use it is things like salt in the air, which some of you have come up with again. Yeah, so yeah, loads of stuff. Salty aroma, that's a really nice one, aroma. Silky sand graveling down my coarse hands, that's beautiful, well done. Nice sibilance there as well. Citrus breeze, oh, I love that. Yeah, sand rippled beneath my feet, I love these. Well done, guys. And you're actually using some language devices in there as well, rather than just giving me, I can see the sea, I can see the palm trees. Yeah, lovely. So taste, don't feel like you have to, when you're writing, shoehorn someone in who's eating some candy floss or something just to get your taste in. If it doesn't fit, don't do it. Okay, let's move on. So, sounds then, alliteration. So a sound or a letter that is repeated at the beginning of the word at least twice. Now, what's important to note is that you can have alliteration and they don't have to be right next door to each other. So, for example, here, cheering children, he stood with a heavy heart. Now, we can also use he and heavy heart, and you can have 3 instead of your 2, and that's absolutely fine. And I've picked out Shelley here, boundless and bare from Ozymandias. You've got the and in between, you can still say that's alliteration and that's fine. That's usually the only misconception when it comes to alliteration. Right, sibilance. Sibilance is slightly different. So sibilance is a special type of alliteration, so it's the repetition of the s or sh sound. So you can have 2 different ones next to each other in terms of you can have a s and you can have a sh. It doesn't have to be a sh and a sh or s and s. So I've got some examples for you there. Now, this is a really nice example. So this is Tennyson from Charge of the Light Brigade. So, reeled from my sabre stroke, shattered and sundered. So we've got shattered in there, which is different to the other sus sounds that we've got, but that still counts as sibilance. That is still fine. Right, okay. And then our last one is onomatopoeia. Again, a nice one, nice straightforward one. So words that sound the same as the noise they make. So bang, crash, tinkle, wallop, crack, there's absolutely loads of them. I picked out gunnery rumbles from Exposure by Owen. So can you think of any sounds that you think you could hear from the beach that are onomatopoeic? Let's see what you come up with. Crashing waves, yeah. Gush, crush, yeah, lovely. Whoosh, swish, splash, yeah, lovely. There's absolutely loads of them. So it's a nice, easy one to get in, nice, easy mark when you're writing. Okay, so similes again then. So this is where we use like and as to compare one thing to something else. So I picked out Spits like a tame cat from Storm on the Island, which is a lovely one, and The World Overflowing like a treasure chest from Poppies. Those are both using like. We can also use as, so the man was as funny as a clown. That's the only as one I've got there. I've got loads of likes. But you see the point, and I'm sure you're all familiar with similes. Symbolism. Now, This is a really interesting one. I'd be really impressed if you got this into your writing. You do see this more in the reading section because it's quite complicated. So this is where we use a symbol to demonstrate an idea or quality. So I've got a dove and an olive leaf there for peace. I've got a white piece of material, which is a surrender sign. And then I've got basically the colour red for danger there. So I've picked out a stop sign and a traffic light, but we could have all sorts of things for red to mean danger. We could also have sort of things like blood that we would associate with red and danger. Right. So we're almost at the end. Metaphors. So this is where we say something is something when it literally isn't. So the snow is a white blanket, here's a shining star, and her long wavy hair was a flowing gold river, which is a really nice one. Is this the same as an extended metaphor? Yes, to an extent. So, with a metaphor is just a short, concise sentence. With an extended metaphor, you expect that to go on over a number of sentences, maybe a paragraph, where you keep using that metaphor and linking it in with other things. So yes, it is similar, but it's just a metaphor that goes on for a longer period of time, effectively. Would pathetic fallacy link in with symbolism? Yeah, it's not quite the same, but it's along the same sort of lines. So they're both representing something, aren't they? So yes, you're right, but they're not the same thing. So symbolism is a sign that we have in our society that we all understand to mean one thing. Pathetic fallacy is the weather reflecting a particular mood. That doesn't necessarily mean the same thing for everybody, so it's slightly different. For Inspector Calls, we use 7 deadly sins of English to symbolise characters. Yeah, nice. Is there anything else? No, I think that's everything else. Right. I will see if I can go through pathetic fallacy at the end or come back to it in the questions, but I haven't got time to look at it again right now. Okie doke. So, imagery then, this is quite a nice one. You'll probably do imagery without realising that you're doing it when you are writing. So this is vocabulary that gives a visual description in the reader's mind. So the concert was loud, so loud that her ears rang for days afterwards. The tree bark was rough against her skin. It just creates a really clear picture. It's really vivid, and we understand what is being meant by that in a way which is really straightforward. Right, okay, so let's get to our paper then. So I appreciate that was a really quick whistle-stop tour, but I want to get through this so you know how to answer your question too. So that was basically our backing for it. So this is our question, and we're going to look at language features and techniques first of all. So this is the extract. So this extract, I'm just going to read this out to you, save you reading it. So this extract is taken from the beginning of Mice and Men, written by John Steinbeck. The text was written in 1937 following the story of two brothers and their journey to find the American dream. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with Of Mice and Men, and you've probably read it at school. So this is taken from the very start. So, evening of a hot day started the little wind to moving among the leaves. The shade climbed up the hills towards the top. On the sandbanks, the rabbits sat as quietly as little grey sculptured stones. And then from the direction of the state highway came the sound of footsteps on the crisp sycamore leaves. The rabbits hurried noiselessly for cover. A stilted heron laboured up into the air and pounded down the river. For a moment, the place was lifeless, and then two men emerged from the path and came into the open by the green pool. So, this is sort of a standard length that you will be given to look at in the exam from an extract. So, first of all, let's go through and see what we can find. So, let me grab my pen. So, evening of a hot day, so we could potentially say that this is pathetic fallacy. So we're expecting this, I would say this is quite a serene and picturesque paragraph that we've got here. So, started the little wind to moving among the leaves. Now, can an evening actually start something off? The answer to that is no. So, this would therefore be an example of personification. So with personification, we'll be looking for verbs. So started here is a verb. So because it's an attribute or an action, we will be looking for verbs when we come to personification. So when you comment on it, you can say the verb in this personification shows. Right, the shade climbed up the hills towards the top. So again, shade can't climb. So that's an example of personification. On the sandbanks, the rabbits even sat as quietly as little grey sculptured stones. So we're comparing the rabbits to something else. So we're using as, so we've got a simile. So I would also say that this is really strong imagery because we can all imagine quite clearly what these rabbits look like. I can't say rabbits today, what's going on? And it also uses a rule of 3 here. So we've got little grey sculptured. So that's a rule of 3. So we've got 3 adjectives being used there. And then we've got sculptured stones as well. So we've got an example of alliteration going on there. Which we can also call sibilant. So you can use either. If you say sibilants, that's a higher understanding, higher mark because it's more specific. But if you say alliteration, technically it's not wrong. So that's fine. And then from the direction of the state highway came the sound of footsteps. Now, here we're starting to see the use of senses a bit more. So far, our use of senses we've only had as see. Now we've got hear, so we've got more than one going on. It makes it more panoramic, more visual in our minds. Strong use of imagery. And then we've got crisp here, which I've just covered, I've drawn over it. So crisp being an example of onomatopoeia. Then we've got the rabbits hurried noiselessly for cover. Nothing particularly interesting in that sentence. A stilted heron laboured up into the air and pounded down the river. Now, I think, again, we can take laboured and pounded and make an argument for personification. Because when we say particularly laboured, not so much pounded, the use of personification there, can birds actually labour in the way, do they really work hard in perhaps the way that we do? Does that look different? And the answer to that would be yes, they look completely different. But it gives us a visual representation of how that bird is carrying out an action. For a moment, the place was lifeless, and then 2 men emerged from the path and came into the open by the green pool. So nothing particularly in terms of language devices and features that we can comment on in that complex sentence there. So that's roughly all of the language devices and features that you can pick out. So after language devices and features, then once we've picked them out, we need to choose which ones we're going to talk about. So we need to think which quotations are rich here, which can we get the most out of. So we've got loads of personification, we've got simile, alliteration, use of senses and onomatopoeia. Hyperbole, I didn't pick that one out, I've missed that one. So for a moment the place was lifeless. Now, is the place actually lifeless? No, they're just being really still and hiding, aren't they? There is still life there, and it might not be life as in an animal, it would be life as in sort of trees, grass, that sort of thing. So there is life there in some respect. So we could talk about any of those. Now, what I've chosen to talk about is the theme of nature and the use of these two pieces of personification. So what I would like you to do, please, quickly, is tell me how these two quotations are linked to a little sentence, maybe, of how we could compare them. I'll just have a look at the chat feature and see. Yeah, we've got repetition of the word little as well, absolutely. In answer to the OCR exam board question, I can't remember what they do, but you will look at language devices and features, and I doubt you'd be looking at an entire text for it. But I'm sure if you have a look at a past paper, you'll find the answer to that one. Yeah, crisp not being onomatopoeia. Yeah, I can see your point, because it's referring to, it's a descriptive term for the sycamore leaves. However, I think you could make an argument for it, although it isn't a particularly strong one to talk about anyway, so I wouldn't talk about it because there's just not a lot to say about it. Yep, so they're both linking with personification, pathetic fallacy in both as well. Yeah. The idea of nature wanting to escape. Yeah, lovely. Talking about movement. Yeah, lovely. Foreshadowing with the shade and the wind stirring up. Yeah, lovely. So we could talk about those things. Fantastic. Right, okay. Beautiful stuff. So this is my waggle. So that stands for what a good one looks like. So I've underlined all of the pieces of terminology that I've used here. So Steinbeck explores the theme of nature to describe the environment. So far all I've done is I've said what I'm focusing on, and I'm just reusing language from the question. So that's always a really nice starter. So I'm just saying he describes the environment. I'm also using his name as well, rather than saying the author, the writer. I do use it later on, just to give it a bit of variety. But if you use the name of the author, it shows that you've understood and you've read more into it. I think it's just a nice way of showing off. Started the little wind to moving among the leaves. So what I've done here is I've embedded the quotation. I have put all my quotations in italics. You don't need to bother doing that. It's just me making a little difference for you, so they stand out to you. Embedding quotations is a really important way to get higher marks. So you can say, for example, started the little wind. That's fine. You can absolutely do that, but if you embed, it shows a higher skill that you're able to do that. By using personification, the writer creates a sense of calm, gentle movements of the wind. So I'm just giving something that's quite basic in my explanation. So a lot of you may have been taught P paragraphs, Peel paragraphs, comment evidence analysis, seal. There's absolutely loads of variations. Petal, Peter, they're all very similar. What's important is if you have been taught those, that's fine as a base. But what they do is they limit you from getting the really high marks because you're not doing in-depth analysis. So don't feel like you're straitjacketed and limited by that structure. You can go beyond that structure, and that's encouraged by AQA particularly. So the writer creates a sense of calm, gentle movements of the wind. The verb, so now I'm zooming in, I'm giving further detail. Started suggests that prior to this writing, the wind is motionless, creating a serene image. I'm also using a dash here, so I'm using that I can use advanced punctuation. I'm showing I can do that. Steinbeck uses further personification. So I'm now moving on to talk about the other one to describe the shade. Then I've got my evidence. The shade climbed up the hills towards the top. And then this strong imagery, another piece of terminology, makes the reader think of a pleasant summer's day. The verb climbed has connotations. So connotations is, if you're unsure, a posh way of saying things that I think of when I hear this word, ideas. I think of words that I associate with, linking to mountains. This therefore informs the reader's idea of the landscape. Landscape has just fallen off a little bit there. So I'm comparing the two in a sense, and I'm building on top of what I've said in the first one. Right, let's have a quick look. How much should you write about the effect on the reader? Good question. I would say a sentence or two. Always writing about the reader is a good thing to say, to do and say. I don't think I've written about the reader in this one, but I have in my sentence forms. So, yeah, when analysing passages, it's better to be more formal, informal, or formal. Definitely formal, because you're showing off how clever you can be, basically. And using formal language, complicated language, is a good way to do that. How many paragraphs should I write? 2 to 3. It's only an 8 marker, so don't spend too much time on it. Evidence, explanation, response. Yeah, absolutely. What if you use drop in the quotes? Oh, so do you mean if you have 2 pieces but you want to take something out of the middle? So if you want to do that, you write what you want to write, then you put ellipsis, dot, 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 and then the second bit that you want to write, and the ellipsis signifies that you've taken things out of the middle. Right. Do I need to do in-depth analysis? AQA, absolutely. That's how you get the big marks. You can't really get more than 5 marks if you don't do in-depth analysis out of the 8. Right, let's move on. So, what I've also done within this is I've also ticked off the words and phrases bullet point. You can do that really, really easily with this one. So that's just focusing on individual words. So I've focused on started, and I've focused on climbed. I've said verbs, I've talked about connotations, and I'm bundling 2 into 1, and it's a really nice way to be efficient about it. So don't feel like you have to go, right, I need 1 paragraph for words and phrases, 1 for language features and technique, and 1 for sentence forms. You don't. You can bundle them together, and in fact bundling words and phrases together with language features and techniques is better because you're showing in-depth analysis. Right, so I was going to show you sentence forms as well, but I'm not going to bother with annotating them quickly. So in terms of sentence forms, then we have 3 types of sentence forms that we need to know: simple, compound, and complex. So a simple sentence is where a sentence has 1 verb. So I walked home, I walked towards the house, what happened the other day? Now, a verb, if you don't know, is a doing word, an action word. So really nice way for checking if it is a verb that we're looking at is putting a tense inflection on the end. So ing, ed for regular verbs. We have things like run and ran where the vowel changes in the middle. It won't work for everything, but hopefully your intuition will help you. So we've got walk there, we can add ing for walking and ed for walked. We know that's a verb. Wicked is an adjective. Now, if we take the ed away, we have wick. Wick is a word, but it's not the same as wicked. Wick is from a candle. That's what we have. That's how we burn it. Now, if you put the ing, you get wicking, and we know that wicking isn't a word. So we know that that isn't a verb. So you do have that in English. We also have gerund adjectives where we have ing on the end. So for example, stronger looking, where it's difficult to find out from your intuition whether that's a verb or not, because it looks like a verb, but it's moonlighting as a verb, but actually it's an adjective. Okay, compound sentences. So this is where we join 2 main clauses with a conjunction. So for example, and or but. So Sally ate all the cake and Hattie drank all the lemonade. So both of these clauses can stand alone and be a simple sentence, but we can add them together for a compound. Now what you've got to be really careful about is that just because there's a conjunction doesn't mean it's a compound sentence. So for example, I bought fish and chips. Now, chips isn't a main clause by itself. This is just a simple sentence because we've only got 1 verb. So don't be caught out by that one. And complex sentence is where we have a minimum of 2 verbs. So they can be made up of a main clause and a subordinate clause. So for example, Tom asked if he could go out, which posed a problem for Russell. So we've got asked and we've got posed. Those are our 2 verbs. However, the subordinate clause cannot stand by itself. So if we take Tom asked if he could go out away, and we're left with which posed a problem for Russell, we don't know what the which is, why that's there. So it doesn't make sense by itself. You could also have 2 verbs that aren't separated with a conjunction. So I asked if I could take the dog for a walk. So I asked, so we've got asked and take. Could is a modal auxiliary verb here, but it attaches to take, so we don't need to worry about that. Or a sentence with 3 or more verbs. So very apt one at the moment. So I wondered how long it would be before I could go outside whenever I wanted. Yeah, and wanted as well, but it won't let me highlight it. There we go. Okay, so let's have a brief look at sentence forms to round off the session, and then we'll go through loads of questions for you. So I've picked out this one here. So the rabbits hurried noiselessly for cover. So we've only got one verb here, hurried. So here's what I could write about it. So Steinbeck uses a simple sentence to signal a change in focus. So brief point and then my evidence. The rabbits hurried noiselessly for cover. By using a short sentence, I've got my terminology there. The writer creates an abrupt interruption to the description he has provided. That should be, I've got a typo there, so that should be he, to the reader. This signals that the noise made in the previous sentence is one which at least small animals fear and flee from. The sentence is therefore used as a turning point in the description, shifting from the animals and nature to the 2 men. So although it doesn't look like a simple sentence, it is. So we've got rabbits here, which is our noun phrase. We've got noiselessly, which is our adverb, which is attaching to hurried. It's adding something to the verb. It's an adverb. And then for cover. So cover here is a adjective. Right, okie doke. So then we've ticked off all of these bullet points in 2 paragraphs, and that will be enough to get you into the level 4, the top bracket. Right, so in terms of my top tips then for what you need to be doing, embed your quotations, aim for 2 to 3 paragraphs, use as much terminology as you can. So when you zoom in, tell me if it's an adjective, tell me if it's a verb, tell me if it's a noun, tell me what the connotations are. Zoom in on small details. If there is a language feature used more than once, do they have the same effect or are they different? And then how can we say that? And we can link those features together to build up on others. Right, okay, let's have a look at your questions then. So if you've got any questions, send them over to me now and we will go through. So, why did I choose English? I really enjoyed it at A level, that's why I chose English. And always knew I wanted to be in education. Do I need to do analysis first, that one? Are there any techniques the examiners really like? Is it better to link techniques together or keep them apart? Good question. I would say there isn't a particular technique that there is a preference for. I think there are ones that are more difficult. So, for example, extended metaphors, they're more difficult to identify. Symbolism is quite sophisticated. What else? Oxymorons and juxtapositions as well are quite sophisticated. Is it better to link techniques together or keep them apart? I think if there is a clear link between them and you can compare them, you should, because it's a deeper analysis. and it will show that you're creating links and that you're thinking on a higher level. Will we do Excel? So we're focusing at the moment on AQA because it's the most popular exam board by a long way. So therefore, it makes sense to use AQA as our base. In terms of can you take anything away from the session, you absolutely can, because you still look at the same features and techniques. So when I teach individually with my students, I still relatively use the same materials. I just adapt the question slightly into the same format as the exam. Would deafening silence be an oxymoron? Absolutely it would. How many marks would you get for that paragraph? Right, okay, so if you just write one paragraph, even though it's quite complex, you probably won't get more than 5 marks because you've only written a paragraph. Add them together with the other one I've written, we're talking 7 to 8 because it's high level. Okay, are you an examiner? No, I'm not.
Hi, Vicky.
Hi.
I have a question that's come through on the Q&A, which is, if you write many paragraphs and the consistency of your writing quality reduces, does this affect your mark?
Yeah, so first of all, you shouldn't be writing lots of paragraphs for this one anyway, because it's only 8 marks. So you don't need to be writing more than 3 paragraphs. And if you do consistently, sort of start to get a bit weary and you can't keep it up, then you will drop marks because it's not consistent. Right. How many language techniques would you mention in each paragraph? Don't go overboard. Don't try and get them all in there because you need to be specific. You need to talk about the effectiveness. So I would say 2 in terms of actual language devices, maybe 3. So for example, I spoke about imagery and personification twice. So, and put those all together. And then I talked about words and phrases in terms of word classes. What question is this? So this is paper 1, question 2. If you go over the time for an 8 marker, should you finish or leave it? Leave it. If you spent more than 10 minutes or so, 10 to 12 minutes on this, move on to the next question. Get all of your questions done. Don't sacrifice other questions for you getting full marks on this one. It is only an 8 marker. So you've also got a 16 marker, your question 4, and you've also got your big 40 marker at the end. So you need to make sure that those are done and those are done well. So spend more time on those ones and don't sacrifice time that you would spend on those ones in your question 2. Move on, because there's only so many marks you can get, and 8 marks in the grand scheme of things isn't a huge amount compared to those other questions. With sentence forms, do you need to worry about compound complex sentences? Yeah, so with sentence forms, it seems to be the least popular one to talk about. You don't need to talk about sentence forms. It says you could. You really need to talk about language features and devices and words and phrases. If you can get sentence forms in there and there is something that is interesting to talk about, then talk about it. But if it's just a variety of sentence structures just because you need variety in your piece of writing, then don't bother talking about it if it's not interesting. You need to ask yourself, is it interesting? And if the answer is no, don't write about it. Find something that is. WAGGLE stands for what a good one looks like, so a model answer. Assonance is the repetition of vowel signs. That's something that you mainly find in your poetry, so don't worry about it too much.
While we're on that, Vicky, it might be worth going through those definitions from the beginning again, because I've seen quite a few comments pop up just as to like what the different like devices and techniques are that we might be looking out for, if that makes sense.
Yep, that's fine. So let me just get rid of that. Right, so so we've got personification then. So this is giving a non-living thing object qualities of a human. So for example, saying something can walk, run, anything along those lines. Anthropomorphism, I can never say it, anthropomorphism is giving body parts to something else, so table legs. Pathetic fallacy is when the weather reflects a mood, so if it's raining that might be a sad mood, if it's sunny, happy mood. Repetition, saying the same word or the same idea more than once. The same idea is more linked to the structure question, question 3. Rhetorical question, a question that is asked but doesn't need an answer. We don't see too many of them in our reading section. Oxymoron, 2 words that are neither next door or close together that have opposing, opposite meanings. Juxtaposition is 2 big ideas that are contrasting, that are opposite. So that's the difference between oxymoron. So oxymoron is small words, juxtaposition is large, sort of more sort of sentence level. Use of senses pretty straightforward: touch, taste, see, hear and smell. Alliteration, the repetition of a sound or a letter at the beginning of words. They don't need to be right next door to each other, but they can be sort of close, sentence level sort of thing. So measured motion there, like and living as well, we could say boundless and bare. Sibilance, a specific type of alliteration, so s or sh sound that's repeated. Again, you can have a mixture of the two, like I said earlier, so sabre stroke, shattered and sundered, so the s and the sh sounds being used. Sounds, so onomatopoeia, so words that sound the same as the noise that they make. Simile, using like or as to compare something to something else, so Diane danced like a princess. Symbolism, a symbol that's in our society that we all understand to mean the same thing, so red meaning danger, a dove meaning peace. We could also have sort of balancing scales, which means law and sort of justice. Metaphors, saying something is something else when it literally isn't. So it's similar to similes, but we can take the like or as out. So we could say the snow is like a white blanket. That would be a simile. And then we take the like out and say the snow is a white blanket. Metaphor. And then imagery, which is the last one, which is vocabulary, excuse me, that gives a visual description in the reader's mind. Right, let's jump back on the Q&A.
I think we've had quite a few questions on how to approach the paper in general, whether it be how to approach the paper as a whole, or whether or not we'll be doing a question on the a session on the 40-marker question, or whether we'll be doing a creative writing session. So if you've asked any of those questions, just to say that it might be a case where we address those as individual sessions going forward, because obviously with English there's a lot to cover, and with only 5 minutes or so left, it might be a case where if lots of you do want to look into how to approach the paper and how you can get top marks and things like that, then we run a session on that separately. We've also had a few questions on what will be coming up next, or how you can access the recordings and things like that. So as I mentioned at the start, everything is recorded, and if you go on to the My Tutor online school page, you should be able to access links to the recordings that way. And also on that page you'll be able to see a timetable of what's coming up next, so what sessions are coming up next. And just keep a lookout for all of those sessions. Hopefully you'll be able to have more English sessions next week, as we've had lots of you come to this one today, which is great. Thank you for coming, and as I say, look out for more next week. If you have any more questions in the next sort of 2 minutes, then send them through. If not, I've just had one come through that has said, can you please give an example of juxtaposition?
Oh, I hate being put on the spot with things like this. Right, so, oh goodness, thinking of an example of juxtaposition. Let me see if I can find a nice poetry one. I'm rubbish at doing these off the top of my head. So, nice one. So, all's fair in love and war. So, everything isn't fair in love and war. Love and war would be the oxymoron going there, because love and war, we could say, are opposites. In terms of juxtaposition, saying that everything is fair. So that would be the idea. What else can I say? You can't teach old dog new tricks. So the old dog and the new tricks would be the oxymoron, and saying that you can't do it. The process of doing something, the verb teaching, would be the juxtaposition there. How many quotations should you use per point? So use one quotation and then zoom in on a particular word or phrase that you think is particularly interesting that you can say more about. So, and then quote that particular word or phrase again, so you make it clear. Anything else? So this is English language, paper 1, question 2. However, you would, with your literature, you will have found lots of devices with these, so it's a bit of a crossover. How do you look at the extract? What would you talk about? So in terms of looking at the extract, so what I think is essential for you to do is, before you look at each question, read the question first and then go and look at the text. So you're actively reading, rather than read the text, look at the question, read the text again to find what you want for the question. With this one as well, because you're looking at a specific paragraph, if you've already annotated it when you first read it, don't annotate the one that's on the question on your answer paper in front of you. Don't do it twice, because there's no point. How big should the paragraphs be? This is sort of how long is a piece of string?
Yeah, and I think it's definitely one that we might want to include in like a session on exam technique and approaching the exam. Cool. So we kind of have about 30 seconds left. So I think this is probably a good place to stop, and just to say that look out for more English sessions next week, where hopefully we can start to address some of the questions that you guys have had around the exam technique and how to approach all the questions and things like that. But thank you so much for coming, guys. It was really good to see so many of you here in the session today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And just to say that we have our maths tutorial happening at 12:15, so stick around for that. And we also have our physics tutorial happening at 2 o'clock. And also to say, lots of you requested it, so we have a biology session as well today at 3:15. So lots of stuff going on for you guys, so make sure you're checking that online school page and accessing the sessions from there. Thanks, guys. Have a good day, and see you shortly for the other sessions. Bye.
Bye.